Joining me now for more on the refugee crisis is Nii Akuetteh. He's Executive Director of the African Immigrant Caucus here in Washington, D.C. Nii, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
So let's begin with this conference that's going on. What do you think African leaders want to see come out of this summit?
I think what they would like is help in, I particularly speaking, I mean, if I might put myself in their shoes, if I were one of them, I would say, look, we have to give, protect the human rights of the Africans trying to get into Europe. Frankly, the impression I get from the Europeans is basically this is a conference to put pressure on the African leaders to say, keep the Africans away from Europe. And I think that is atrocious, given Europe's closeness to Africa and the historical ties from colonialism to the fact that Europeans are free to work in Africa, to the fact that they take Africa's resources. So frankly, I am very skeptical of this summit. I think they are putting pressure on the African leaders, and because the African leaders are vulnerable and because they are dangling money in front of them, I fear that what will come out of it will not be satisfactory to people like me and my group.
And of course, you mentioned money. Do you think any aid should be contingent on African countries? And I think what you're going to say, agreeing to take back some of these economic migrants if these African nations make the situation in their home countries, when it comes to the economy, the political situation, better so they don't have to leave to begin with.
Oh, I agree with that completely. In fact, one of the things that my group here in Washington works for with the international community is to make democracy in Africa much better, because we think that creates conditions and helps sustainable economies grow. So on that, we agree with the Europeans. I think even the African leaders agree that if they can make things better at home, then they don't have their people leaving and risking their lives. But given the kind of international system that we have now, which does exploit Africa, you have an economic system that does exploit Africa, that makes things very difficult. And then some of these European countries actually support bad leaders on the continent. So they contribute to the bad conditions. And now what they are saying is, we don't want you here. And I think that the history of colonialism also, you know, everybody recognizes that when you are dealing with war refugees, you should allow them in. Well, there are a number of wars around Africa. We had Mali, we have Libya, we have others in which the Europeans were directly involved. The European Union intervened in Libya, and yet now they are frowning on African migrants coming through Libya, and I think that is wrong.
And you think they are the ones who created part of the problem?
Precisely, yes.
Nii, there have been some 800,000 refugees that have crossed into Europe this year. Only 150,000 have been from Africa, Eritrea, Nigeria, Somalia, Mali, perhaps, as you mentioned.
Yes.
And there are concerns about the humanitarian situation in some of these camps. What are you hearing?
I think what I'm hearing is terrible. For instance, here's one example. There was a man from Sudan who got to France and to Calais and then walked through the Eurotunnel all the way into the UK, dodging trains. Now, international humanitarian law says he should be taken in as a refugee, but he's been put on trial. So I think both the conditions in the camps in France and then the reception that the UK is giving, all that is terrible. Frankly, I think European leaders need to do a better job. Now, I will grant that public opinion in Europe is not very welcoming of so many refugees. But I think European leaders have an obligation to explain to their people the reasons why they should be welcoming all these people. So I don't think they are meeting their obligation from my point of view. They should be talking and trying to shape public opinion, but they are running away from it.
You know, Germany is one country that has accepted a huge amount of refugees.
Absolutely. You know, we just had two conferences here in Washington on this issue, and I actually was talking to the Chargé d'Affaires of Germany, and I actually told him that what Mrs. Merkel, the German Chancellor, has done at great political risk is very admirable. So yes, I single out Germany and give them kudos, but the rest of the leaders should be copying Mrs. Merkel, and they are not.
Understood. Nii Akuetteh, always a pleasure, sir.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you.